The moon hung heavy and low, its silvery light diffusing through the mist like a spectral lantern, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with the restless breeze. Around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual nocturnal chorus muted as if the very woods were wary of what had awakened beneath the lake's glassy surface. Ilias's eyes, sharp despite the weariness etched deep into his face, darted across the darkened underbrush. Each step forward was measured, his fishing knife gripped tightly in one hand, the other brushing against the rough bark of a tree for balance. Beside him, Mara's breaths came quicker, her gaze flickering nervously between the oppressive shadows and the shimmering moon above. Her green eyes, usually so fierce and inquisitive, were now wide with a cocktail of fear and determination. "Did you hear that?" Mara whispered, halting and cocking her head, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves. Ilias nodded slowly, whispers, like the lakes calling a saw, warning us. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of indistinct murmurs that seemed to crawl under their skin, twisting their thoughts with icy fingers. The moonlight reflected off the water's edge, where ripples shimmered unnaturally, distorting the familiar outlines of reeds and rocks into grotesque shapes. It was then that the first figure emerged. From the shadows of the village square, a woman stepped into view, her movements jerky and disjointed, as if her limbs obeyed some unseen puppeteer. Her eyes glowed faintly silver, the pupils dilated into formless orbs that reflected the moon's eerie light. Her mouth opened in a silent scream that twisted into a guttural growl, and from the depths of her throat came a sound that was no longer human. Ilias instinctively raised his knife, stepping in front of Mara as more figures staggered into the clearing. The villagers, or what was left of them, were contorted into unnatural postures, their faces stretched and distorted, shadows seeming to crawl beneath their skin. The lunar entity had claimed them, animating their bodies as vessels for its dark will. "Run," Ilias barked, grabbing Mara's arm as one of the possessed lunged forward with unnatural speed. The wet slap of footsteps on mud echoed through the silent night, punctuated by the ragged gasps of breath and the crunch of broken branches. They sprinted toward the edge of the village, hearts pounding in their chests, the nightmare chasing them relentlessly. Mara stumbled, but Ilias caught her, pulling her back to her feet. The moon's reflection shimmered on the lake beside them, a gateway to madness and oblivion. Breathless and desperate, they found refuge in an old cabin, its wooden walls cracked and weathered by time. The moonlight filtered through the broken window panes, casting fractured patterns of light and shadow that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. "This isn't just some curse," Mara said, voice trembling. "It's a hunger. It feeds on us and our fear, our memories." Ilias nodded, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "And it's only just begun." Outside, the possessed villagers gathered, their distorted forms silhouetted against the moonlit lake, waiting, watching. The line between the living and the damned blurred beneath the sinking moon, and the night stretched on, heavy with the promise of horrors yet to come. As dawn threatened the horizon, Ilias and Mara exchanged a glance filled with unspoken resolve. Whatever lay beneath the lake's depths, whatever malevolent force had awakened with the moon's descent, they would face it together, or not at all. But as the first light kissed the water's surface, a chilling thought settled in Ilias's mind. How long before the shadows claimed them to? The night was far from over. The air smelled faintly of pine and dust, the kind that clings to old wood and secrets long hidden beneath the surface. Ilias Marrow sat stiffly at the rough-hewn table, his knuckles pale as he gripped the edge, eyes fixed on the weathered face of Old Man Harbin. The old man's pale blue eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of weariness and urgency. His breath shallow, as if each word he spoke cost him something precious. "You want to know the truth, Ilias," Harbin began, his voice a low rasp. "The truth that's been buried with the dead and drowned in the lake's depths." Elias nodded slowly, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. He had guessed the village's troubles ran deeper than superstition and lunar madness, but hearing it spoken aloud was another matter entirely. Harbin reached beneath the table and pulled out a bundle of brittle parchment tied with a faded ribbon. He placed it gently before Elias, the edges curling like the leaves of a long-forgotten tome. "These are the records of the elders," he said, "the ones who made the pact with the moon itself." Ilias's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the first sheet, faded ink revealing sketches of strange symbols. Lunar phases intertwined with aquatic imagery, fish, waves, and a crescent moon sinking into a pool of black water. "The elders," Harbin continued, "once sought to protect Glimmer Hollow from the harshness of the world beyond. They believed that by binding themselves to the moon's power, they could ensure the village's safety and prosperity. They crafted a ritual, whispered in the dead of night, beneath the fullest moon, upon the shore of the lake." The old man paused, eyes distant, but the power they summoned was not meant for mortal hands. It was ancient, hungry, and it twisted the pact into a curse. Ilias's mind reeled. The villagers' disappearances, the madness spreading like wildfire, they were all symptoms of a legacy written long before his time. The knowledge was a double-edged blade, offering a path to understanding while threatening to sever his hope. "Why, tell me this now?" Elias asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because," Harbin said, "the curse is awakening again, and the elders' time has passed. It falls to you now to face the darkness they unleashed. You must understand the nature of the entity feeding on our souls, or we are all doomed." Elias looked out the small window, where the moon's reflection shimmered on the lake's surface, a deceptive beauty masking a malevolent hunger. The night was alive with whispers, the wind, the water, the fading sky above. He clenched his fists, the weight of the village's fate pressing down like the cold night air. "Tell me everything," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes." As Harbin delved deeper into the history of Glimmer Hollow's secret past, Elias listened intently, absorbing the grim tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and the desperate hope that had led the elders to gamble with forces beyond their control. The story was a tapestry woven with fear and regret, a cautionary tale etched into the very bones of the village. Outside, the lake murmured softly, the moon's glow stretching like a finger reaching for the depths. Elias felt the creeping pull of the lunar madness, but beneath it, a spark of resolve flickered to life. The fight was no longer just for survival. It was a battle for the soul of Glimmer Hollow itself. When the revelations finally ceased, the two men sat in silence, the heavy truth settling between them like the night's chill. Elias knew the path ahead would be perilous, that the line between reality and nightmare would blur beyond recognition. But armed with the knowledge of the Elders' Pact and the curse's origins, he felt, for the first time in weeks, that he had a chance to confront the terror lurking beneath the lake. He stood, the candlelight casting long shadows on the cabin walls. "Thank you, Harbin. We have work to do." The old man nodded solemnly. "May the moon watch over you, Elias. But beware, the moon's light can be as deadly as its darkness." Stepping out into the biting night, Elias inhaled the sharp air, the moon's eerie glow bathing the village in silver. The lake mirrored the sky's fading light, a liquid abyss that promised salvation or oblivion. As he gazed into the reflection, a shiver ran down his spine, a warning and a challenge. The secrets in the dark were no longer secrets. Now, the true battle began. The moon, swollen and luminous, had sunk ever closer to the lake's glassy surface, its silver light casting a hypnotic sheen that flickered with unnatural life. Shadows stretched and warped unnervingly under its glow, and the villagers whispered with mounting fear as the boundary between the real and the unreal thinned perilously. At the edge of the village, a man stumbled through the lacing underbrush of the forest path, his breath ragged in the cold night air. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat echoing like a warning drum. Behind him, the dim lights of Glimmer Hollow flickered uncertainly, the sounds of distant voices and hurried footsteps growing faint. Ahead, the lake's surface shimmered, the moon's reflection rippling with a sinister allure that seemed to reach out like fingers of liquid light. The man's eyes darted wildly as he fought the magnetic pull of that otherworldly glow. He was one of the last to resist the creeping madness, but the terror inside him had clawed free. Desperation drove his legs forward, away from the village, away from the sinking moon. Yet the lake's reflection beckoned irresistibly. His skin prickled with cold sweat, and his mind teetered on the edge of comprehension and chaos. The air thrummed with an eerie vibration, a low hum rising from the water that set his teeth on edge. Behind him, footsteps raced through the village streets. Elias, Marrow, and Mara Lorne pushed through the crowd, voices terse and breathless in the night. They caught sight of Sheriff Caltone, standing rigid and watchful at the village boundary, his gruff face pale beneath the moonlight. "He can't just run off into the night," Elias urged, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to stop him before whatever's out there gets to him." Calton's eyes narrowed, skepticism battling with a growing unease. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet. Panic won't help anyone." "Panic?" Mara's sharp tone cut through the tension. "We've seen what the moon's doing. People are disappearing. You saw it yourself." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "I'm trying to keep order, not fan the flames of hysteria." The argument was interrupted by a sudden, unnatural ripple that shattered the lake's reflection like glass fracturing under pressure. The villager reached the water's edge just as the shimmering surface twisted and convulsed. His form blurred, distorted, caught between worlds as the moonlight danced malevolently. A strangled cry escaped his lips, swallowed quickly by the night. His body was drawn forward, fluid and relentless, as the lake claimed him, the water swallowing the desperate man whole. Gasps and screams erupted from the few witnesses left behind. The village was thrown into chaos. Elias's heart hammered painfully as the reality of the loss sank in. This was no longer a story of wonder or superstition. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time. As the moon's descent continued, the sky seemed to darken unnaturally, stars dimming beneath the lunar glow. Lights flickered in windows, shadows stretched and writhed along the walls of homes, and the air grew thick with an oppressive dread that seeped into every corner of Glimmer Hollow. Elias stood by the lake, his gaze locked on the sinking moon and its fractured reflection. His mind battled the rising madness, clawing at his thoughts. The fragile line between sanity and oblivion thinned to a razor's edge. "We have to fight this," he whispered to the void, the words barely audible over the low hum of the water. "We can't let it consume us all." Mara joined him, her green eyes fierce with determination despite the fear lurking beneath. Together, they faced the darkening night and the monstrous presence beneath the lake that threatened to drown their world in lunacy and shadow. This night marked the breaking point, not just for the fleeing villager whose life was stolen by the lunar reflection, but for all of Glimmer Hollow. The battle against the encroaching darkness was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it demanded a reckoning. And as the moon sank ever lower, the nightmare only deepened. Its silvery light spilled like molten metal, trembling across the lake's surface in restless waves. He could almost feel the weight of it pressing down, an unnatural heaviness that seemed to warp the very air around him. The village of Glimmer Hollow lay behind him, its darkened rooftops swallowed by shadows. But his gaze was fixed on the luminous orb, sinking closer with each passing moment. The reflection in the water flickered, not like a calm mirror image, but as if the surface was alive, breathing and shifting with a sinister pulse. Elias's heart thudded painfully in his chest as the edges of the moon's glow bled into the water, bleeding into the sky, as if the boundary was dissolving. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the madness creeping into his vision, but it only deepened. Shapes formed beneath the shimmering light, faces, distorted and fluid, their hollow eyes begging for release or warning of doom. A sudden gust of wind stirred the reeds at his feet, whispering secrets he could almost understand. The lake's surface rippled, sending tiny waves lapping at the shore, each one carrying a faint, haunting melody that tugged at his mind. Elias swallowed hard, the memories of his wife's loss flashing behind his eyes, mingling with the growing fear that this night would bring more than just sorrow. Farther down the shore, a faint glow emanated from Mara Lorne's cabin. Drawn by the flickering light, Elias made his way there, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots echoing in the quiet night. Mara awaited him inside, her sharp green eyes scanning a worn leather-bound book spread on the wooden table. The faint scent of herbs mingled with the smoke from a single candle, shadows dancing across the walls. "Elias," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped them both. "I found something." He leaned over the tome, tracing the faded script with a trembling finger. The pages spoke of an ancient ritual, one tied to the cycles of the moon and the lake's depths. A ceremony meant to sever the bond between the celestial and the earthly, to banish the curse that had haunted Glimmer Hollow since its founding. "It's risky," Mara warned, "but it might be our only chance to stop this madness before it consumes us all." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we don't have time to waste." As Mara carefully outlined the ritual's steps, Elias felt a shudder ripple through his body. His mind reeled, visions invading his senses with increasing ferocity. He saw the moon no longer distant and serene, but a monstrous, sinking eye swallowing the lake whole. Its light flooded the village, turning the familiar streets into rivers of silver. Homes submerged beneath the tide. Faces appeared in the water, twisted in silent screams, reaching out to him, begging for salvation and revenge. He staggered back, clutching his head as the hallucinations surged. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred, the whispers from the lake growing louder, promising oblivion. "Elias," Mara's voice cut through the haze. "Focus. We can fight this." He forced himself to breathe, the cold night air grounding him, if only for a moment. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally, thick clouds swirling in ominous patterns. A low, haunting hum rose from the lake's depths, a vibration felt in the bones, resonating with the pulse of the moon. The village was holding its breath, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Elias and Mara exchanged a determined glance. The battle for Glimmer Hollow was far from over, but for the first time there was a glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. The fading sky whispered of promises and terror alike, and the lake waited hungry, patient, and merciless. As Elias looked back toward the water's edge, the moon's reflection shimmered, beckoning once more. He tightened his grip on Mara's hand, steeling himself for the trials to come. "We begin at dawn," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside. And beneath the fading sky, the nightmare deepened. The air was thick with tension as Elias and Mara prepared for the ancient ritual that might sever the lunar entity's hold. Old Man Harbin, though frail, had offered his knowledge and guidance, a flicker of the village's buried past rising to meet its present peril. The clock was ticking. The moon was sinking ever lower, the boundary between sky and water blurring with every passing hour. Elias felt the weight of the village's fate pressing down on him. But beneath it all, a stubborn flame of determination burned. The moon might eat the lake, but he would not let it consume Glimmer Hollow without a fight. The night was far from over. Sheriff Caltaine stepped cautiously onto the weather-beaten pier, his boots echoing softly against the planks slick with dew. The moon loomed low and swollen above the lake, its pale light shimmering with unnatural clarity on the water's surface. It was unlike any lunar glow he had ever seen, too vibrant, too close, as if the moon itself might slip from the sky and drown in the lake's cold embrace. Caltaine's breath formed ragged clouds in the chill air as he scanned the rippling reflection. His fingers tightened around the grip of his flashlight, its beam slicing through the fog to reveal distorted shapes beneath the water. The villagers' whispered fears had seemed like superstition, wild stories born from grief and panic. But tonight, something gnawed at the edge of his skepticism. A sudden flicker caught his Aja shadow, not cast by any physical form, writhing and twisting beneath the surface like a living nightmare. The water roiled as if breathing, and a faint, almost imperceptible whispering drifted to his ears, a chorus of voices speaking in a language older than the village itself. Caltaine's heart pounded fiercely. His hands slipped from the flashlight to clutch the cold railing, knuckles whitening. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Across the lake, lanterns flickered in the village square where Elias, Marrow, and Mara Lorne had summoned the remaining villagers. The hall was thick with tension and the scent of burning pine and herbs. Elias's lined face was drawn tight with worry, his deep-set eyes scanning the crowd for signs of hope or despair. Mara stood beside him, her dark hair pulled back, eyes blazing with a fierce determination that belied her fear. "We can't wait for the moon to come crashing down on us," Elias said, his voice steady but urgent. "This is no ordinary celestial event. It's a curse one that's been feeding on us since the village's founding. The lunar entity is real, and it's growing stronger." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some faces pale with dread, others hardening with resolve. Mara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "We have knowledge, tools, and each other. If we stand divided, the entity will consume us all. But together, we might just survive." Back at the dock, Caltaine's thoughts churned. The evidence was undeniable. Now the strange disappearances, the villagers' madness, the haunting reflections. He had spent years dismissing Ilias's warnings, seeing him as a troubled man haunted by personal loss. But tonight, the veil had been lifted. The supernatural was no longer a tale to be scoffed at. It was a grim reality. Caltaine pulled a small, glistening lake leaf from his pocket, the same type found near the latest disappearance. Its edges shimmered faintly under the moonlight, unnaturally perfect and cold to the touch. The air around him thickened, the whispers growing louder, pressing against his mind like waves. Determined, he made his way toward the village hall, the weight of his newfound knowledge pressing heavy on his shoulders. When he arrived, Elias and Mara greeted him with a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. The sheriff's gruff voice broke the silence. "I've seen it. I know it's real. We need to act now." Together, the three formed a fragile alliance, a beacon of hope amid the encroaching darkness. Plans were laid to protect the remaining villages, to confront the entity beneath the lake, and to sever its hold on Glimmer Hollow. Yet beneath their determined faces, a shadow lingered, the knowledge that this confrontation could cost them everything. As the night deepened, Elias and Kaltain stood side by side at the water's edge. The moon's reflection fractured across the lake's surface, shifting and shimmering with a malevolent life of its own. Neither spoke, but in their shared silence was an understanding. The village had reached a crossroads. The old certainties were gone, replaced by a terrifying new reality, and the battle for their souls was about to begin. The chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of madness and the promise of a dawn that might never come.